So,
For a
good
good
evening. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us today. We always have a little bit of a technology glitch, but Ella, I'm so glad that we were able to sort that out this evening. So, how are you and where are you calling from?
Well, Greg, I am doing quite well. I'm here in Columbia, South Carolina, and so yeah, we're still waiting on fall to make an appearance.
Well, we're a day away from Thanksgiving. So, what does your Thanksgiving plans look like?
Honestly, my husband and I are just probably going to eat something very, very simple, very small, and just hang out a bit. Maybe go to the new park that was just refurbished in downtown Columbia. Nothing huge at all. And you?
Well, I've been cooking, and that has been something that has made today very enjoyable. But I'm anxiously looking forward to celebrating the holiday. And
Mhm.
I certainly wish everybody out in the audience a great celebration. And if you are not celebrating, just some great time to recalibrate yourself. And I think it's interesting as you and I have this chance to do our live prompt is to maybe dive into some discussion about our podcast. So, Ella, why don't you tell us about your podcasts?
Well, I am the host and unlicensed therapist of Black Writer Therapy Podcast. And this podcast is going into its fourth season. And I've created the space, honestly, Greg, to uplift and amplify Black women writers, and to really focus and harness the abilities that we have as writers to heal not only ourselves through our writing with our words, but a lot of us get those same kind of reports back from our readers, letting us know that, like, just reading the book, it's nice to be seen, it's nice to be heard, it's nice to feel representation, and that those, our books are very healing. So the show focuses a lot on the healing process, but also we just gab like, two Black women would get together and do. So you're liable to hear anything on the show because it really is more of a conversation than an interview.
Hmm. I find it
Yeah.
interesting in this day and age where storytelling is so important, and the fact that you have a show that really engages with women writers. Is there any particular story that has stood out?
Oh my gosh, why are you asking me this question? I have, like, within 4 seasons, I can tell you I've had probably upwards of 50, 60 writers on the
Wow.
show. And I have writers who are independently published, who are trade published, who are academic writers, all the gambit, right? But there's been one, and so yeah, this is hard to pick, but there's one writer whose story is just phenomenal to me, and she was actually on this season, and she's an ER doctor who decided that it was too much. She needed a break. That she was done. She was tired of the rat race, tired of conforming, tired of doing all the things, and she took this sabbatical, and she told me that she learned how to appreciate the everyday, the beauty, the luxury of everyday things. And I thought that was the most brilliant thing I'd heard,
Mm,
because we really don't take time to just appreciate the luxury and being able to sit and have a glass of tea in the afternoon and not feel hurried or, feel the need to justify why we are
mhm,
sitting and having a glass of tea. So that was, yeah, that story really stuck with me. And it could also be because it was really recent, but it was
mhm,
something about that almost permission to just stop, be still,
mhm.
and appreciate the luxury of all of that. So yeah, thank you for asking that question. And we are done talking about my show, sir. So let us please hear about your show. Something to say, I believe.
Yeah, so we are in our second season. It has been truly a journey. It focuses on the passion that individuals have that applies to their professional as well as their personal life. And because of that, we're able to interview a wide variety of people. You know, we've interviewed the president of a chamber of commerce. We've interviewed a gentleman who markets synthetic blood, if you can imagine. We also have interviewed a DJ who was actually very interesting. You know, I thought it was all about the music, and he explained to me it's more about the math and understanding the timing that's associated with being a DJ, which was very interesting, something I would have never thought.
Mm-mm.
I also interviewed a woman who was a noted public speaker who was celebrating her anniversary with her husband, and she was riding a bike with her husband in the redwood forest, and a 7,000-pound tree fell on her, and she's now paraplegic. When she shared the journey that she has experienced in her life, it makes you realize that you sometimes have to put things into context, even as you think
Mhm.
about some of the challenges that you face. You know, she explained how she had to learn to breathe, how she had to, think differently. Obviously, the idea that she was now paraplegic meant that she had very, a wide range of physical challenges, but she had an amazing husband who had been there with her through and still is with her through
Mhm.
everything. But her ability was her ability to speak to people and invigorate people and motivate people. So now she speaks about the needs for people with disability, providing insight about the architectural design of buildings to make sure that people who have disabilities can get in and out of the buildings. Also, how to even design a home if you are building one. It was just an amazing story of perseverance, understanding what the passion means for her, both personally and professionally, and has been a huge eye opener. So for me, I love the show because we don't just speak to one audience, we speak to a variety of different audiences,
Mhm.
and they never, ever, ever cease to amaze me in terms of the stories that they have to tell. But we are here because we are focusing on the prompt of the week.
Yes.
And as it relates to the Alive prompt, we were given a prompt, which is what's the moment you realize you have to create your own sense of belonging in spaces that you entered where they really weren't built for you. And I have to say that has happened to me quite a bit. So I'm always a believer in ladies first. So, what about for you? What was the moment that you realized that you had to create your own sense of belonging because spaces weren't really established for you?
And this is honestly the truth, and it's going to sound crazy. Kindergarten.
Uh-huh.
And again, I know it's going to sound weird, but I'll be 51 on Sunday. And so I
Happy
was a part
birthday.
of, thank you so much. I was a part of that kind of first group in the South, like, or maybe the second wave, right? That was being bussed into schools like in the early 80s
Mhm.
to make sure that they were not still non integrated. And so I remember going to kindergarten, and it was half day for me then. Um, and I just remember walking in the classroom, and everybody, everybody was different than me. I was the only one who looked like me. I was the only
Mhm.
one who had braids. I was the only one who was this complexion. I was the only one whose lunchbox didn't have a image of me. And then there were just images of everybody in the books and on the book bags. And I just remember going home that first day and asking my mom, why am I so ugly? Because I had no idea. I mean, I couldn't see myself. And so because I couldn't see myself, I was like, well, there must be something wrong with me. And so, based on that, or just, realizing, wait a minute, that can't be right because I've been around people who look like me my whole life. And so, I'm going to have to make this space someplace where I can find and maneuver. And 5 years old, I said, well, I was six, late birthday. But yeah, I was like, I told my teacher, I'm going to need to find some playmates that look like me because I don't feel like this space is mine. I don't feel like this classroom is going to be fun for me, is what I remember telling Miss Pender. Yes, I still remember her name
Wow.
because she was
Wow.
awesome. But yes,
Mhm,
that's the first
mhm.
time I recognized that there are places in the world where people who look like me, and they're not represented there,
Hmm.
and that sparked this huge desire to create and hold these containers, these spaces for women who look like me, so that they're not ever out here feeling like I don't have a place to be.
Wow. Wow. For me, it's interesting because as I think back to when I was a child, there are probably many times when I walked into a space that wasn't one that um, where I probably had a sense of belonging. But,
Hmm.
I came from parents who were very interesting. My dad was a boxer. I actually learned some time ago from Native Americans about how you should always introduce yourself. I'm the son of. So my father's name was
Okay.
James, and my dad had a professional career, but in the earlier years, he was a boxer. And if you know
Hmm.
anything about a boxer, they tend to continue to box
Hmm.
because psychologically they feel as though they want to win, even though their body might say, we're done. So I have that drive that I'm going to continue to fight no matter what from him.
Hmm.
And then my mom was the type of person who always felt that there was something better and that you have to strive for it. And if you don't even strive for it, you never even had a chance to get it. So coming from some, parents where one was a boxer and I have that DNA to fight and one
Hmm.
who wants something better, I've always relied on who I came from to help me
Hmm.
manage that. And as I've gotten older throughout my life, there are a number of times where I'd be in those spaces where I really didn't feel as though I belonged, but I was not going to turn around and walk away from it. And if I ever did, I was always mad with myself because I felt
Yeah.
I let myself down. So, and there are a lot of times we all probably go to a networking event and you're like, I don't know if I should be here, if I can manage this, and give me a reason to get out of here, right? For
Right.
whatever it
Right.
is. But whenever I leave, if I do that, I always feel like I have disappointed myself. So
Hmm.
I just recently came back from a conference in Portland, and I got to tell you, I went to everything. I drank every glass of wine that was available. I ate all the food that was available, and I took every picture that was possible as well. But I do think
Yes.
it's important that the level of confidence that you have in yourself is what allows you to step into those spaces and figure out, carve out where you fit. And
Hmm.
it may not necessarily be based on the visuals of what you see others doing, but it's based on who you are as a person and how sometimes just being in that space is a big statement in itself in terms of who you are. So I find it to be a very interesting question because it's one that just kind of carries over from when you're a child, even up until adulthood, and you're
Yeah.
forever navigating that. But I think we get better and better about not disappointing ourselves and relying on
Mhm.
some of the things that are really part of our DNA.
I love that you said that. This idea about actually not disappointing the self and the level of confidence that is like paramount, right? Because as an artist and as a writer, like I navigate spaces because writing is a very like it is one of the most skewed professions, right? I think that anyone could navigate, and so most of the spaces in my earlier writing, years have been predominantly white women and
Mm,
older white women because most people
mm,
don't actually start writing until they retired because it's not
mm.
like royalties are going to pay your mortgage, right?
Right.
And so it's like, and I find that when I roll into the spaces, Greg, and I am my whole authentic self, and I bring my most unapologetically Black woman writer self, and I
Mm,
show up
mm,
as me, then I don't have to carve out space,
mm,
right? It's I remember having Vanessa Riley on the show, and she says your gifts will always make room for you. And
mm,
that is probably one of the truest statements I've ever heard
mm,
because I tend to be in all of these spaces where I may be one of maybe 10 or 15 out of four or
Mm,
five
mhm,
hundred, and yet I know when I walk into a space, I am not demanding respect. I'm not demanding to be seen or heard, but there is a way in which,
mm,
um, to carry oneself,
mm,
where you walk in and they can't help, right? You
mhm,
can't help but be seen. You can't help
mhm,
but command that
mhm,
respect. And I think that's a lot to do with the confidence. And as you said,
mhm,
recognizing who you are, whose you are, right? Where you come from,
mhm,
and who has to come behind me. Like that's the
mhm,
thing that I am always thinking about.
mhm,
Who's going to come behind me, and how are my footsteps going to make this path a little bit easier for them to
mhm.
traverse?
It's funny though, as I think back on probably what were some of the more prickly spaces that I've gone into that perhaps I didn't necessarily feel as I was belonging, and I was going to try and figure out. So I served on the board of our Hispanic chamber here in Philadelphia. So
Mhm,
I'm not bilingual. And I wish I had put more effort in my life in order to become more bilingual. But I think that sense of being in a space where English is not the language that's spoken,
mhm,
and
mhm,
how you are able to position yourself to understand and feel comfortable.
mhm,
And maybe sometimes it's not about the spoken word, it might be just your interpretation of the space. And sometimes being in those spaces, just being in those spaces, makes a big deal. There are some people when I've gone to events where English is not the first spoken language, that there is an appreciation of the fact that number one, I didn't run away from it, that I stayed
mhm.
with it, and I found whatever with the cultural connection that I could
Yes.
could adapt from that. And to that degree, I think you also garner even more respect from others, not just for yourself, to say, I don't necessarily need to speak English to feel as though that I can feel, comfortable. I remember years ago, I was in Hong Kong, and it was so incredibly difficult because it was like only every other word that I was able to get. But
Hmm.
I understood. And because of that, it was such a great experience. And I use that to find out how I can adapt and be wanted in certain spaces. But I know that was our prompt. I did want to talk to you about passion. I know you and I had talked about passion
Hmm.
earlier. So you have such a unique show. Um, what is the passion that you are able to dive into when you are hearing all of these different writers? I mean, in general, it's a very interesting format, but how does that fuel you with each interview?
Um, First and foremost, I am a big kid and I love stories.
Hmm,
And sitting with women writers, with Black women writers
mhm,
that I admire, that I study, right? Because I'm not just inviting, like I invite everyone has been on the show,
mhm,
and these are writers that I'm like, oh my gosh, can't believe you're sitting here on my proverbial couch.
mhm, mhm,
And the passion here is when we find this common thread, like, and I think that's what I wanted to speak to. You brought up the common thread, finding it. And that's the thing. When I'm able to connect with these writers in a way that feels like by the time the show is over, we almost feel like we've known each other
mhm,
for years.
mhm,
I get that a lot from listeners. Like, are you guys like, have you been friends for a long time? And it's
mhm.
like, no, we just met, right? A couple of minutes before the show.
Mhm,
I And so I think it is developing these kind of hard and fast friendships. And the beautiful thing about all of it, Greg, is that they maintain, right? I'm still in touch with these writers. I can still reach out to these writers, for help, or if they need me, they call. And so it's just this. It's a space that creates sisterhood,
mhm,
and I think that is what drives me. I think that is my passion, right? This holding this container for Black women writers to come together and be who we are unapologetically, so without having to mask any parts of what we are, without having to explain and speak to what Toni Morrison calls the white gaze. It is a gift to be in the company of Black women who are writers and who are thinkers and who are honest enough to say, "Oh yeah, by the way, I'm still healing from X, Y, and Z," right?
Mhm.
And so that is the passion for me, is to
Mhm.
a hold this space for us because it is mandatory, it is necessary that we have these containers that help support the larger ecosystem, right?
Mhm.
And then number two, um, the the beauty of creating sisterhood
Mhm.
and knowing that it's not just for that hour or so that
Mhm.
we are in conversation with each other, that when we go out and we see each other at conferences or book events
Mhm.
or online, it is still there is still
Mhm.
that camaraderie. And thirdly, I it's important, I'm always thinking, who's
Mhm.
listening that has this desire to be the writer? Who is listening to this session where, Piper Hughley is talking about her love of historical fiction and how she goes after these stories that need and have to
Mhm.
be told? Like, who else is out here who's a history buff, a little girl who
Mhm.
says, "Oh, I'm going to write about X, Y, and Z because I don't see any. I need to make sure that
Mhm.
I am doing everything possible to hold space not only for myself and my contemporaries, but to hold space for those who are coming behind me." And that may very well be the veteran educator in me,
Mhm.
that remembers, you have
Mhm.
to each one teach one, right?
Mhm. Well, it's funny as I think about mine, the passion that really drives me is the fact that I feel educated each time I do a podcast. You do your research and you've kind of selected the person because there is a very interesting perspective that they bring to a conversation, but there's so much enlightenment that they can provide. Our
Yeah.
current podcast is featuring the integration of artificial intelligence in
Mm-hmm.
workforce,
Mm-hmm.
and getting some clarity about how just not artificial intelligence, but things like artificial generative um, intelligence is becoming a better way of understanding how AI evolves because we feed it
Mm-hmm.
information. But the kind of insights that I get from the various individuals and understanding the nuances of what they do
Mm.
is a huge um, passion of mine because often, you take tidbits of that conversation and they become great speaking points
Mm-hmm.
when you're engaged in conversation. You're also getting this firsthand insight about issues that you would not necessarily know about. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
we interviewed a gentleman about synthetic blood, and I had absolutely no idea of how significant it is in certain cultures to have access to other
Mm-hmm.
blood access, because there might be limitations in terms of the kind of blood that they can use and how they could get it, or how you engage with developing this particular kind of blood, and it can be made available for people in life or death situations. It was just an amazing, and he markets it like I didn't expect to gain as much insight as I did from him. But that's the passion that I've always found with it, is I feel as though I get smarter and smarter each time
Mm-hmm.
I do an episode. So I'm going to keep working with more and more unique guests to give me that kind of insight.
Yeah.
So listen, you and I are just about 6 minutes away from
Oh,
the end of our podcast, which
that went fast.
um, I know it really is. And as you and I had talked about it, like a half an hour, really. So, so what would you want to say to the audience as we kind of begin to draw things to a close, either
Mm-hmm.
about your podcast or just some of the things that you feel, quite honestly, are real pressing as we enter into a few days of rest?
Um, that part, go ahead, rest. Um, I think it's become so hackneyed. Everyone's saying rest is resistance and rest is blah, blah, blah. Rest is one of the most important assets that I think we have. And when we are neglectful to our bodies and our bodies' need for rest and sleep, um, the havoc that is wreaked. You were talking about the young woman who was crushed by a tree and became disabled. And her, being disabled in that way, it's very visible, right? And I am disabled, and I have several disabilities. One of them is narcolepsy with cataplexy, and
mm,
most people have absolutely no idea how this disorder, it's a neurological sleep disorder, how it affects the body. But I have never appreciated sleep, right? Having
mm,
a good sleep hygiene. I've never appreciated sleep and rest
mm,
more than after, being diagnosed with this very difficult and debilitating disorder,
mm,
um, and then having to relearn and reset sleep
mhm,
schedules and all the things. And so, yes, I think that you said it, rest. We have got to, and
mm,
especially as Black people, we have got to learn that it's our birthright to rest. We
mm,
have to take moments
mm,
to be and not do, because we are human beings, right? Not
mhm,
human doings, and it is
mhm,
acceptable to be still, to be at rest.
mm.
Um, I have a little placard in my kitchen right now, and it says that, and I'm paraphrasing probably really horribly, um, that most suffering is the result of people not being able to be at rest in a room.
Mm,
And I'm holding on to that because I think
mm.
that's just very important. Um,
Wow.
so
Well, I thank you
yeah.
so much for sharing that. That is, like I said, amongst the insights that you get when you have these kind of conversations. And I appreciate your transparency and being so authentic with our audience, so that they can have a better understanding of who you are as a person. Ella, I respect you wholeheartedly for how you persevere and manage throughout each day. You know, the conference I went to this past week, it was interesting because each day brought in a new experience. So
Mhm,
the organizers of the conference on the last day had talked about the trajectory of the experience. You know, he
mhm,
wanted to certainly invigorate people. He wanted to educate people. He wanted people to be charged with critical thinking. He wanted people to
mm,
analyze things. And he talked about all the things that they were kind of pushing, pushing, pushing. And then he said, but we also wanted you to rest. And they did. They had like this incredible party, right? And it was fantastic. But he said there is absolutely nothing wrong with taking time to experience the community, to be social, to allow yourself to
mm,
think of nothing more than just either enjoying the music or being with friends. And while you have those different kind of elements in a conference, it was just amazing the way that he phrased it and kind of looking at the entire week, that he wanted the
mm.
intensity, but he also wanted to give you a space to just rest and enjoy.
Yes.
And it was a fantastic conference. So looking
Sounds
at that,
like.
I would say, yeah, I would say it was fantastic. So tell
Sounds
us
like.
about where we can find your podcast. We know we can find it on the Alive Podcast Network.
Yes. And everywhere else. In all honesty, I'm
Mm,
pretty much wherever you listen to podcasts. I have found my podcast in places I didn't even know it was being distributed to. And so, yeah, wherever you listen to podcasts,
mm,
that's where I am. And I'm also on YouTube, not visually, but it's an audio podcast.
mm,
I just do not have the wherewithal to go visual yet.
right, right,
And so, yeah, it's pretty much everywhere. And I have a little spot on my Substack.
mm,
There, my chaotic erotic writer's life,
mm,
and I have my podcast there as well, where I'm in the process of building a wellness writer
mhm,
community. Just again, always thinking about holding these spaces.
right.
So I want to ask you a question, and this is the
Sure.
question that I always ask guests
Mhm.
somewhere in my show after I stop running my mouth. And that question is, how are you healing this evening?
Well, there is a movie that I have been watching that has about 8 episodes, and I have been completely engaged.
Mm.
And, you know, I know that for some, watching TV isn't the way to kind of relax, but for me and my husband, it's been fantastic. We've just been kind of like hanging out, watching this movie. I'm doing a little bit of cooking. My collard greens are on the way. Mac and cheese is next. So it's a little bit of this, it's a little bit of that. But yeah, that's really where I'm at today. And it feels absolutely good. So
I love that for you. And so, can you tell our listening audience where they can find your podcast and anything new that you have popping up?
sure. So you can find us on the Alive Podcast Network. We're also on rss.com, or you can just visit our website, something to say with craigdeshields.com. However, we are launching a spinoff. Yay. It took us 2 years to be able to do it, but we have a new partner. We've done our first promo. It's called A250 Plus. It's about the 250th birthday of the United States. More to come. It launches on January 5th, but we're really excited to see the ability for us to expand our reach in terms of podcasts. So, more to come on that.
That's cool, Greg. A250. I look, and I'm A250 plus. I'm thinking, are we talking about 50 plus year old people? No, we're not. We're talking about 250 years of America. That's going to be
Absolutely.
really interesting. And congratulations on your expansion.
Great. Well, listeners, thank you so much for joining us, Ella. It has been an absolute pleasure to do
Indeed.
a live prompt with you. I hope we get a chance to maybe do a podcast swap between the two of us as well in the near future.
I hope so. I'd love to come on your show. And I'd make an exception. I would make an exception for you.
Well, just so that you know, I love to write, but when I am on your show, we can talk about some of that activity for me as well. So,
Okay.
all right,
Good enough.
listeners, thank you so much. And to Alive Podcast Network, thank you for this opportunity once again.
Always. Alrighty. Thank you so
Great.
much.
All right. Bye now.
Bye bye.